Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the third part of the Sonic CD playthrough, and we are in the game's one and only water level, Tidal Tempest. And, well, as you all know with Sonic games, people tend to not like water levels all that much. I, personally, controversial opinion here, don't mind them all that much. But Sonic CD naturally lends itself to a slower pace, as opposed to something like Sonic 2 would. And plus, I kind of dig, especially in the US soundtrack, the kind of like smooth chillness to the soundtrack here. Also, when I mentioned before, earlier in the playthrough, that this playthrough would be very explorative, and the time on individual parts could get pretty beefy, this is where that starts to happen. Like, the first act alone takes about 12 minutes total, counting the special stage, but... So, just prepare to strap in. Anyway, well, just like in the Japanese release of Sonic 1, we have, like, the wavy background stuff going on, which is a cool graphical effect. I always liked it. And it is pretty similar looking to Labyrinth Zone, but that's not quite by accident. My understanding is that Sonic CD is basically constructed from old assets of Sonic 1, but kind of reprogrammed to suit their purposes, because Yuji Naka, one of the lead programmers of Sega, well, handling, Sonic 1 and other related games, left and then joined Sega Technical Institute, where Sonic 2 is made. And so he didn't actually work on this. And it's noted that Sonic CD is not as well programmed as some of the other games, which is unfortunate, but it's due to, well, I'm speaking in terms that I don't quite fully understand. What I've been told is the Sega CD is a fairly complex machine, for a variety of reasons, most notably a limited amount of work RAM, which causes weird programming restraints. And it would be really, it'd be difficult, even if I completely understood myself, it'd be difficult to explain in terms that are immediately apparent to a layman. And two, I don't necessarily fully understand all of them myself. I understand, like, in a sort of broad strokes sense. So, it wouldn't necessarily be conducive. But the short version is that the Sega CD is fairly complicated, especially compared to the Sega Genesis. No, it is more powerful, it has a little bit more processing power, more RAM and stuff to work with. Anyway, we're in the past of Tidal Tempest, and the past is actually, the past section of Tidal Tempest is one of my favorite areas in the game, because I like the present of Tidal Tempest, but the past version just adds kind of this weird, creepy ambiance. It's got a real mood to it, and I always liked how the background is, like, almost partially, I don't know how to describe it, you know how the background has a lot of darkness to it? It's a nice contrast to how lively, the present is, which I appreciate. More contrast is always a good thing. Anyway, we're looking for the Metal Sonic projector and the roboticizer machines. Again, the Metal Sonic projector is not really necessary, even if you want all the goodening and getting all the good features in the game. However, I'm doing it just to show off where they are, in case you're curious. I mean, to my understanding, they just enable, they just show some flowers hanging around, and they don't really do anything. And for Tidal Tempest Act 1, the Metal Sonic projector, you have to really go out of your way to find. You have to backtrack quite a ways. I mean, one thing you could do is you could press start, and one of the face buttons, ABRC, will let you It will cost you a life, but it will transport you to the very start of the level in what the last time period you were in, so you would go to the very beginning of the level in the past. And like I mentioned before, this is the part of the playthrough where videos are going to take a while. So, you know, just keep that in mind, be prepared for it. Now, since I'm trying to show off the good features in every Act 1, we're not immediately going to head to the new level, even though we've destroyed both projectors. Well, the projector and the robot sensor. Because I intend at least showing off once each round. Because most people really don't. They just kind of blast through the game and don't really show off a whole lot. But now remember when I mentioned like the past kind of has this kind of dark, kind of serene and kind of eerie feeling to it? And then we go back to the present, it's got this chill, mellow vibe. I always liked that contrast. And we got a future sign, and we can basically go back and reuse the same entrance to the past for the future. Also, I believe when you enter this tube thing here, it won't actually count down your air against you. I believe that's how it works, because that would be kind of scummy to go in there with very little airtime left and then drown in the middle of it. Anyway, once you do that, we come to the good future of Tidal Tempest. In Tidal Tempest, Act 1, Tidal Tempest in general, the good future's got this really funky kind of upbeat vibe to it, which is kind of similar to how the present is, but it kind of kicks up a notch. And I'm not exactly sure what happened when the screen was readjusting. Kind of a weird screen tearing. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to manipulate these underwater fans. On the subject of water levels, a lot of people take issue with them because of having to like wait for air bubbles or the possibility of drowning, but my counter-argument is that in the classic Sonic games, the 2D ones, they place air bubbles pretty conservatively. They don't really make you go very far to get one of them. It isn't like you have to go across the entire level to get one. Even in Labyrinth Zone, they're pretty lenient on it, which is why I don't mind them. It might be with water levels in some types of games is more the inability to protect yourself, a la Mario or Donkey Kong Country, where that's kind of an issue, and I find it kind of annoying that I would go through a game normally where I can actually attack things and defend myself, but when I come to a water level, basically it's a game of don't ever touch anything because you can't actually hurt anything, and therefore you cannot protect yourself. And I always found that kind of obnoxious, personally. I think Mario and Donkey Kong Country are fine franchises. They're not necessarily my favorite games in the world. Donkey Kong Country 2 notwithstanding. That game is legitimately great. There's a possibility of doing a walkthrough on that one day, but that means I'd also have to do 1 and 3, and I don't really care for 1 or 3 that much. We'll see. Anyway, we got another extra life. It doesn't really matter in this game unless you're restarting a lot, which it could matter. Speaking of extra lives, if you sit still, like, preferably above water so you wouldn't drown, but if you sit still for long enough, Sonic will just jump off screen and it's an instant game over. And he just says, "I'm out of here." I'm not showing that off, but it's kind of neat, I guess. You feel free to do it if you want. And that's the end of Act 1. Now, if you absolutely wanted to, you could just jump right to the end of the level. You don't have to, like, explore all around like I did. There's not much reason to if you aren't already inclined to do so. Anyway, we got special stage number 3. You don't necessarily have to follow the route I'm doing in these special stages. It wouldn't hurt, because, I mean, it works, but you can take whatever route you want. Just be careful to not get yourself trapped in water, because you run out of time almost instantly. Now always be mindful of the icons on the ground, like the green pads that will instantly launch you a certain direction. Be mindful of them, because there's a couple of special stages where they will have them sometimes throw you backwards into water, and that's obviously really nasty. It could just lose you the special stage on the spot if you aren't already aware of it. So keep it in mind, but we got our 3rd time stone. The thing with the special stages is in the Steam release, they run at like a full 60 frames per second. They don't have all the slowdown that exists in this game. Which is a really nice benefit to the Steam PSN whatever release. So it is definitely the definitive version of this game. But you know, there's something to playing the original Sega CD version. Though if you're playing this game for the first time, I would still highly recommend the Steam release, because they really did a nice job fixing the physics. Anyway, that first section at the beginning of Act 2 is like Labyrinth Zone Act 2? No, Act 3, where it has the infinite slide that just goes on forever. So it just loops infinitely. You'll see something like this in Sonic 3 and Knuckles really often, where levels just... they don't really have a... there really isn't a straight up bottom of the level. If you get to the very bottom, it just loops at the top. Which enables Sonic 3 and Knuckles to have some really huge levels, which is a cool thing. I always like that. Fortunately, Act 2 will not take nearly as long as Act 1 did. Though it won't necessarily be over all that quickly. Now, this gargoyle shooting out blue fireballs, all it does is push you back. It doesn't actually hurt you or anything. And the gargoyles kind of look like a modified version of the gargoyle heads from Labyrinth Zone in Sonic 1. I mean, they're already blatantly reusing assets from Labyrinth Zone, like the background there, although it is touched up a little bit to look nicer. There's a little bit more shading and more details on it. Which, when it comes to reusing assets, if they're updated, I don't mind. Anyway, we have the bad future of Tidal Tempest. Real downer bad future also. I mean, like, kind of all the bad futures are like that in this game, but... kind of somber, kind of like... I'm trying to find a good way to articulate what I mean. Like in the American soundtrack that's playing now, you hear like a vocalist with some random sounds, but I actually really like it a lot. It adds a lot to kind of this... the whole place is kind of screwed up kind of feeling. And this is what I really like about the US soundtrack as opposed to the Japanese one. It definitely has a sense of atmosphere in the good and bad futures, which I kind of get why other people don't like it as much, because especially if you never bothered to go see the good and bad futures, then it wouldn't be that big of a deal to you because you'd never seen them. Or maybe atmosphere just isn't that big of a deal. Which is also something perfectly legitimate. Anyway, I've shown off enough of the bad future, and I got a pass sign, so I'm going to use that to go back into the present. Well, I guess technically it wouldn't be the present. Like, now would be the present, but, well, time travel is stupid. And we're back in the present. And now we can just go grab a past sign and go immediately to the past so we can destroy the roboticizer and the metal sonic projector. And I never get tired of this music here. I don't quite remember if I mentioned this before, but the past themes are all shared within both versions of the soundtrack. That is, both the Japanese and US versions will have the same past themes. It's the present good and bad futures that are different from game to game. One thing I always liked is that the past themes always kind of feel kind of primitive. And I don't mean primitive in a bad way, as a derogatory term. I mean primitive as in just kind of old-fashioned. Like these kind of samples and synthesizers and stuff. And the futures tend to use lots of samples and like voice recordings and things like that, which is also really cool because, you know, it's the future, so it's to be futuristic. They're literally using futuristic technology, whereas the past themes are relying on, guess, sort of old-fashioned tech, which is, you know, kind of neat because they actually put thought into this. I mean, granted, Sonic CD is not the most well-programmed game under the hood, which I could get into in a later part. That's actually a pretty lengthy discussion in and of itself. Anyway, with the roboticizer destroyed, we can just head to the level. I'd already shown off the bad future, and I'd shown off the good future in Act 1, so I don't really see any need to retread ground. And now we're in Act 3. And because we got a good future in both Acts 1 and 2, we have a good future here. I actually like the bad future better. I actually feel that way in this game. The bad futures just feel more interesting than the good futures do, but obviously, if you want the good ending, you want the good futures. I could have just gotten all the bad futures and just got the time stones at the very end to get the good ending, but Oh, since I'm using it as a walkthrough, this is a good way to point out where all the roboticizers are. Anyway, with Robotnik here, he's gonna wander around in circles, and there's a locked door, and it only opens if he goes through the passageway, and you have a certain amount of time to get through it. Otherwise, you're gonna have to go try again, because the whole thing loops on itself infinitely. It's like the beginning of Act 2. Which is actually kind of neat, because it kind of prepares you for this part, where it does it here. So, yeah. Anyway, this boss is pathetically easy. There's a whole bunch of bubbles here, so you're never going to drown. It's pathetically easy to dodge the energy balls, and you only need one hit on Robotnik to defeat him. You should not lose to this guy under any circumstances. I'd argue this is even easier than Green Hill Zone Sonic 1. And well, he's finally down. Anyway guys, I'll see you next time on this playthrough of Sonic CD. Have a good day everyone.